You've always been the loyal little soldier, haven't you, Maya? That's why you'll never see the corner office. He said that in front of 9 people. The full Tuesday morning stand-up. 9 colleagues, 2 of them my direct reports, one of them a client we were supposed to be impressing. My name is Maya Reeves. I was 34 years old. And by the time you finish this story, you'll understand why that sentence, that one dismissive, clipped sentence, was the beginning of the end for Richard Harlan, not for me. The company was called Meridian Analytics. Downtown Chicago, 22nd floor, the kind of office that has exposed brick on one wall, and a cold brew tap nobody uses after the first week. I had been there for 6 years. 6 years of 7 a.m. arrivals and quarterly reviews where Richard would write exceeds expectations in the box, and then forget my name in the next all-hands meeting. Richard Harlan was our VP of Strategic Partnerships. 51 years old, Yale MBA, a laugh that started in his chest before it ever reached his face. He had a gift for making you feel like you'd been complimented when you hadn't. His direct reports called him Rich. He corrected me once when I used that. Richard, he said. Rich is what I am, not what you call me. He thought that was funny. 4 people in the room laughed. I ran a team of 5. We managed data pipeline integrations for mid-market clients, not glamorous work, but the kind of work the company couldn't survive a quarter without. In 6 years, my team had a 90 for client retention rate. I had documentation of every metric. I kept documentation of everything. That was a habit my mother gave me. She was a paralegal for 28 years. She always said, paper trails aren't paranoia. They're patience. The first time Richard crossed a line I noticed, it was March of my 4th year. We were in the client services bullpen, the long open room with the good windows, and I had just presented a data migration solution that took my team 11 days to build. The client, a regional insurance group out of Milwaukee, was visibly impressed. Richard waited until the client stepped out to take a call. Then he turned to the group and said, "Good work, everyone. This is exactly the kind of thinking I've been pushing the team toward." I had not said anything. I filed that sentence in the back of my mind and said nothing. 6 months later, the annual Innovation Summit. 200 employees, the hotel ballroom off Michigan Avenue, the kind of event where the CEO gives a speech, and the catering is 1 tier better than it should be. Richard presented a client growth strategy on a slide deck. Slide 7 was a framework I had submitted to him in writing 5 weeks earlier. My name appeared nowhere. I smiled through the applause. I went home that night and I forwarded my original email timestamped, with the attached framework, to my personal account. The third incident was the Tuesday stand-up I already told you about. The one with 9 witnesses. A client on the line. The loyal little soldier. I had just flagged a compliance risk in a partnership agreement Richard was pushing to close before the end of Q3. I had the relevant regulation cited. I had done the work. His response was that sentence, delivered with the flat calm of a man who had never been told no by someone who didn't matter to him. I looked at the table. Then I looked up. Noted, I said. That was all I said. I drove home that night on the 290, the city thinning out into the flat dark of the suburbs, the radio off. I didn't call anyone. I didn't play anything through the speakers. I sat with what I knew, which was this: Richard Harlan was not careless. He was careful. Careful men who steal credit and dismiss risk flags in front of clients are not doing it by accident. They are doing it because something underneath needs to stay hidden. I went home. I made tea. I opened my laptop. I started a folder. I named it Documentation. Over the next 6 weeks, I did not confront Richard. I did not speak to HR. I did not mention any of it to my team. What I did was work. I pulled every email chain in which I had contributed strategy that later appeared in Richard's presentations. I found 9 instances across 22 months. I documented each one: original send date, my name in the to or CC line, the subsequent presentation date, the slide number where my work appeared uncredited. I also started reading the partnership agreements Richard was closing. Because I had flagged a compliance risk he dismissed, and in my experience, when a careful man waves away a compliance flag, it is worth understanding why. The agreement I had flagged was with a data-sharing consortium, Vantage Partners, LLC, that I had not heard of before Richard brought them to the table in August. They were registered in Delaware. Their principal address was a registered agent service. I spent 4 evenings cross-referencing public business filings. On the 3rd evening, I found it. Vantage Partners LLC shared a registered agent with a holding company whose board included a name I recognized, Daniel Harlan. Richard's brother. The deal Richard was rushing to close before Q3, the one with the compliance flag I had raised and been mocked for raising, would send $340,000 in annual licensing fees to a company his brother helped run. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I called the one person I trusted completely, Diane Okafor, our company's outside legal counsel. She had reviewed contracts on my team's behalf before. She was precise, unhurried, and had a voice that made complicated things feel manageable. I called her on a Thursday evening. I told her I had a document question. She told me to send her everything. She called back in 48 hours. Maya, she said, this is not a document question. This is a conflict of interest disclosure violation and potentially a securities matter. Do you have all of this in writing? I told her I had all of it in writing. She told me to stop emailing from my work account. I had already switched to personal email 3 weeks before that call. The call came at 12:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Richard's name on my phone screen, a time of night he had never called me. Maya. His voice was different. Not the ballroom voice. Something smaller. There's been a situation with the Vantage files. I need you to go into the shared drive tonight, pull everything tagged with that project and delete it. Then I need you to take a few days. Paid. I'll explain everything when. I said, Richard, I'm going to need that in writing. Silence. 4 seconds of it. Then, don't do this. I said, good night, Richard. I hung up. I called Diane. I told her exactly what had been said. She told me not to touch a single file. I didn't. I also screen recorded my call log with the timestamp visible, because my mother taught me about paper trails. Diane contacted the company's board-level ethics committee the following Monday. The investigation was quiet, fast, and thorough in the way investigations are when someone has already organized the evidence for them. I submitted 47 pages of documentation, the time-stamped emails, the framework slides, the Vantage filing cross-references, the recorded call log. Richard Harlan resigned 11 days later. The Vantage Partners deal was voided. The board issued a statement about a review of partnership governance standards that said everything without saying anything. 3 weeks after that, I received a formal letter of apology from the company's chief people officer, acknowledging the improper use of my work in presentations and committing to a retroactive compensation review. The compensation review resulted in $22,400 in back recognition bonuses. That number had been calculated from the 9 documented instances. At the all-hands meeting where the new VP of Strategic Partnerships was introduced, our CEO mentioned my role in protecting the company's integrity. He said my name twice. Nobody called me a loyal little soldier. Richard Harlan joined a smaller firm in Phoenix 6 months later. I know because LinkedIn exists. We have no mutual connections. Of the 9 people who were in that Tuesday stand-up, 4 have since apologized to me in one form or another. One of them still hasn't said a word. I no longer think about why. The client who was on the call that morning, the one who heard what Richard said, sent me a handwritten note after the story made the rounds. It said, simply, I knew something was wrong that day. I'm glad you knew too. I still live in Chicago. I still take the 290. Some mornings I think about the 6 years I spent making a company look better than it deserved, and I feel something that isn't quite anger anymore. I lost years of credit. I lost the ease of walking into a room without calculating who in it might be watching my work and measuring what it was worth to them. What I gained is harder to name. Call it clarity. A firm understanding of the difference between loyalty and compliance. The knowledge that silence and stillness are not the same as weakness, that composure, kept long enough, has a kind of gravity to it. I am 36 now. I lead a team of 12. My mother still asks if I'm keeping records of everything. I tell her, always. That is not a precaution. That is a principle.